Who does Phil Jackson think he is anyway? Legend says he was just a bench warmer back then, a role player on great squads during his playing days. But eventually, you have to give the man credit. For all his success with superstar lineups, some still call him a total disaster. Jackson turned 80, and at 80, the most decorated head coach in league history still drops opinions that cut deep, deeper than almost anyone else. But the coach who once dominated the Knicks from the Chicago sideline is distant now. He barely even watches modern basketball these days. Why? Too political, he says. 11 championship rings, 30 years on the bench, 6 titles in Chicago, and 5 more with the Lakers. Picture the Chicago Bulls winning their 5th title on a Friday. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trophies. The Zen Master managed massive egos, global icons, and the absolute wild cards. Uncontrollables. He had a private view of greatness that no analyst or fan ever reached. He is legendary for guiding Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and those Chicago Bulls to 6 historic NBA titles. Underneath everything was Jackson's unique spirit as a coach. So when the Zen Master speaks on his favorites, 5 greatest players he ever laid eyes on, you freeze. You listen. These are his exact words. This is his own list. Let's get to it. Michael Jordan. The top name on this list should shock absolutely nobody. But the backstory of their relationship, that is where things get interesting. When Phil Jackson first arrived to coach the Chicago Bulls in 1989, Michael Jordan was not rolling out the welcome mat. I wasn't a Phil Jackson fan at first because he came in to take the ball out of my hands, Jordan once admitted, confessed. Honestly, Jordan probably said something a little off-key back then, which might have been blown out of proportion. Think about that. The greatest player in basketball history resented the coach who would eventually help him win 6 championship rings. Hilarious, right? Jordan was very close to the fired coach, Doug Collins. He was not exactly thrilled when Jackson took over and changed the team's entire offensive scheme. Jackson wanted to run the famous triangle offense, built on assistant Tex Winter's unique philosophy, which focused heavily on ball movement, constant cutting, and crisp passing. But Jackson did not flinch. He pitched his ideas quietly, persistent, with total Zen patience. He warned Jordan that to be more than a spectacular one-man show, he needed to lead differently. Real structure, better spacing, and trust. That was the deal. Jordan bought Finn, and the entire basketball world changed forever. Jackson called Jordan the greatest player he ever coached and the best to ever play the game, making it clear that MJ was the most impressive athlete he had ever witnessed. And he said that with Kobe and Shaq in his rearview mirror. That is no throwaway compliment. That is a definitive verdict from the most respected judge in NBA history. In his book, 11 Rings, Jackson wrote that although Michael could be incredibly tough on his teammates, he was masterful at controlling the emotional climate of the locker room simply by being there. Kobe Bryant had a long way to go before earning that status. Kobe talked a good game, but he had not yet felt the heavy burden of leadership in his bones like Jordan did. Masterful. That is the word. Jackson chose. Not dominant, not gifted. Because what truly separated Jordan in Phil's eyes was never just athleticism or scoring. It was his gravitational pull, the way a locker room fell in line around his energy, and the way opponents mentally surrendered before they even stepped on the floor. In 2009, before Jordan's Hall of Fame induction, Jackson declared that he didn't think anyone would ever truly match what Michael did for the game. They might break his records or win even more championship rings, but Jordan's iconic status as a player will always stand, and his greatness will never be topped. And when asked as recently as 2024 who he would start a franchise with if he could pick any player he ever coached, Jackson didn't hesitate for even a second. Michael Jordan. He has to be the top pick. He was incredibly coachable, the legendary coach said, drawing immediate cheers from everyone in the room. Extremely coachable. You know, this guy is special. He executes everything so well, making big timely shots and setting up teammates with perfect passes. For a guy who originally hated Phil's arrival, that is a wild arc. That is their entire relationship. 6 rings and a total transformation of how Jordan viewed true greatness. Not number 2, not number 3, number 1 forever, Scottie Pippen. Here is where things get really interesting because the number 2 spot on Phil Jackson's list of coached legends is not Kobe Bryant. And it is not Shaquille O'Neal. It is Scottie Pippen, and Phil's reasoning for that rank will make you completely rethink everything you thought you knew about the Bulls dynasty. Phil Jackson called Scottie Pippen the most complete basketball player he ever coached, full stop. Not the greatest scorer, not the most dominant, but the most complete. And coming from a man who coached Michael Jordan, that sentence, standing at 6 feet 8 inches, Pippen was famous for his extreme versatility, defensive prowess, and basketball IQ. He attended the University of Central Arkansas, a small school where he polished his game and caught the eye of NBA scouts. In 1987, Pippen was drafted 5th overall and traded to the Chicago Bulls, a decision that would change his life and the trajectory of NBA history forever. But what made Scottie special in Phil's eyes was not the trajectory, it was the temperament. While Jordan initially resisted the triangle offense, Pippen embraced it with both hands from day one. Jackson later said that Scottie had the perfect temperament for the triangle. He didn't need to dominate the ball to feel valuable, he just wanted to win. That buy-in was everything. Think about what Pippen could do on any given night: guard the opposing team's best player, initiate the offense, play the 5 when needed, crash the glass, hit the transition 3, and drive the lane, facilitate on the break. Make a huge defensive play. Throughout his 17-season career, Scottie Pippen was known as the ultimate right-hand man to Michael Jordan, forming what many consider the greatest duo in basketball history. With his elite all-around play, guarding the opponent's best scorer, initiating offense, and playing multiple positions, he was the perfect counterpart to Jordan's scoring brilliance. Then Michael Jordan retired in 1993, and Pippen had to carry the entire franchise on his back. Jackson never doubted him for a single second, and Scottie delivered. He averaged over 22 points, 8.7 rebounds, 5.6 assists, and nearly 3 steals a game. That season, the Bulls won 55 games without Jordan, 55. Jackson always pointed to that season as ironclad proof of Pippen's greatness, not because of the numbers, but because of how he led the team. Quiet, composed, relentless, team first. When Jordan came back and the Bulls put together their second three-peat from 1996 to 1998, Jackson consistently called Pippen their compass. The system needed a foundation. Jordan provided the fire. Scottie provided the framework. Those are Jackson's exact words. The fire and the framework. In his book, 11 Rings, Jackson wrote that they weren't the most transcendent team he had ever coached. That honor belongs to the 1995-96 Chicago Bulls, led by Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Led by, not starring, but led by both of them. And Phil Jackson meant every syllable of that. Pippen finished his career with 7 All-Star selections, 10 NBA All-Defensive Team honors, and a Hall of Fame induction in 2010. The most complete. Jackson said it first. Now Dennis Rodman. Hold on, because this next entry might be the most jaw-dropping thing on this entire list, and it comes straight from the mouth of Dennis Rodman himself. On an appearance on the Full Send podcast, Rodman dropped something that stopped the internet cold. Rodman revealed that Phil called him the best player he had ever coached. The fifth best player, not Michael Jordan, not Scottie Pippen, but Dennis Rodman. Now, whether Jackson said that to uniquely motivate the worm, or whether he genuinely meant it as a pure basketball statement, the fact he said those words to Rodman tells you everything about how Jackson viewed his job. He understood what each player needed to hear to be their absolute best. And for Rodman, being told he was the best player Phil Jackson ever coached, that was fuel. That was rocket fuel. And Phil backed it up in another context, too. At a University of North Dakota speech, Jackson called Rodman the greatest athlete he had ever coached. He could probably play a 48-minute game and play the 48th minute stronger than the first minute of the game, Jackson told the crowd. He was that terrific of an athlete. Not the greatest scorer, not the greatest champion, but the greatest athlete. That distinction matters. Warriors head coach Steve Kerr, who played with the Bulls from 1993 to 1998, said that Jackson always understood Rodman and that how he handled the star forward was crucial. The way Phil coached Dennis was really well. It was the key to everything. Kerr explained that it really showed him what coaching was about because Phil demanded specific things from Dennis, then got out of his way, demanded certain things and stepped back. That right there is the entire philosophy in one sentence. Do not cage the animal. Define its boundaries, then set it free. Rodman led the league in rebounding every single season he played under Jackson. Everyone. He won 3 consecutive championships from 1996 to 1998. He locked up Karl Malone and dove for every loose ball. He played with a ferocity and a precision that was hiding beneath all the tattoos and that multicolored hair and those Vegas disappearing acts. And somehow, it worked. 3 rings, not despite who Rodman was, but because Phil Jackson let him be exactly who he was. Shaquille O'Neal. Talk about dominance that changed the game itself. Shaquille O'Neal. Phil Jackson did not just coach Shaq, he completely unlocked him. Before Jackson arrived in Los Angeles in 1999, Shaquille O'Neal was already one of the most physically overwhelming forces the sport had ever produced. Massive, athletic, incredibly skilled, and yet ringless. He was a phenomenon without a destination. Jackson changed that immediately, and he did it with a story about Wilt Chamberlain. 5 games into their first season together, Jackson stopped Shaq coming off the floor during a timeout. The Lakers coach asked his big man what Wilt Chamberlain's greatest achievement was. Did. Shaq said averaging 50 points and 20 rebounds per game. Jackson told him that Wilt played every single minute of every game. Translation, no excuses, no rest. To be the greatest, you play like the greatest. Shaq got the message. The results in that first season under Jackson were almost unbelievable. O'Neal averaged 29.7 points, 13.6 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 3 blocks, shooting 57.4% from the field. He won the regular season MVP, the finals MVP, and the All-Star MVP. O'Neal is the last player to sweep NBA MVP finals. MVP and All-Star Game MVP in a single season, in the same season. Jackson made that happen by giving Shaq the one thing: he never had real belief rooted in structure. Jackson later said on the record about Shaq's physical dominance, saying that question was asked not so long ago, and he said yes, stab me in the back. He wanted a distinction between 2 of the best players he ever coached. The reality is that Shaq is so dominant, you always have an overmatch. You can always draw a double team and get a clean look for somebody because he is always double teamed. You always have an overmatch. That is how Jackson described coaching Shaquille O'Neal, not a weapon, but an overmatch, a built-in structural advantage that other teams could not solve. Jackson also said publicly that Shaq possessed a dominance that changed the game. Shaq was the major component that allowed defenses to completely change. Or he would run down and get in the lane ahead of the crowd, and well, it was over. When your presence on court literally rewrites the defensive playbook for an entire era of basketball, you are not just a great player, you are a geological event. Their relationship was rarely smooth. There were constant conditioning, frustrations, locker room friction with Tex Winter, and the slow-burning war with Kobe that eventually pushed Shaq out of Los Angeles. But through it all, Jackson never wavered on his assessment of what Shaq brought. 3 championships in 3 years, an entire era, a force of nature. And Phil Jackson was the only coach in history who figured out how to point that force toward a trophy, Kobe Bryant. And then there is Kobe, the most complicated relationship on this entire list, the one that tested Jackson the most, frustrated him the most, and ultimately rewarded him the most. Because by the end, Kobe Bryant became something Phil Jackson genuinely did not expect when they first locked eyes across a practice court in 1999. Kobe came in as a teenager who had skipped college entirely, raised on tapes of Michael Jordan, fluent in Italian, burning with an ambition that had no ceiling and no filter. From day one, he was relentless. From day one, he was Basing's God. Also, as Jackson put it, stubborn and hard-headed in ways that made coaching him an exhausting, exhilarating. Kobe was hell-bent on surpassing Jordan as the greatest player in the game. That obsession with Michael was striking. Not only had he mastered many of Jordan's moves, he had adopted many of Jordan's mannerisms. Jackson even orchestrated a sit-down between Kobe and Jordan, hoping the icon could talk some humility into the young Laker. When they played in Chicago that season, Jackson arranged a meeting between them stars, hoping Michael Jordan could nudge Kobe Bryant toward a more team-first mindset. After they shook hands, the first thing Kobe said was, "You know I can kick your ass one-on-one." Kobe just drops it on him. "I can kick your ass one-on-one." You have to respect the absolute audacity. Even Phil Jackson loved it. That was classic Kobe, fearless, borderline delusional in the best way possible. That kind of self-belief is what separates the legends from everyone else. But Jackson wanted that fire channeled. He needed it focused and useful for the team. After years of friction following the Shaq era, Kobe finally became the undisputed centerpiece of a rebuilt Lakers squad featuring Pau Gasol, riding shotgun. Something shifted. Jackson wrote in 11 rings. Kobe's isolating habit began fading as he matured. Increasingly, Kobe invested real energy into connecting with teammates, especially during those long road trips. He transformed from a distant lone wolf into a genuine leader, not Michael Jordan's style of leadership, Kobe's own brand. Intense, demanding, yet inclusive. Jackson noted that Kobe studied the Brenny tense game like nobody else. He was a true basketball scholar with a superhuman work ethic. He outworked everyone every single day. That relentless drive brought two more championships under Jackson in 2009 and 2010. What made that 2009 title so special to Phil was who Kobe had become by then. Jackson loved leaving him out there to anchor the group. He wasn't just a high-volume scorer or a Black Mamba highlight reel, he was a completely transformed player. As Jackson put it, his teammates became his partners, not just his spear carriers. Real partners. That was the ultimate evolution. That is what 5 championships and 10 years of hard friction look like from the inside. Jackson later described coaching Kobe and Michael as the ultimate experience of a lifetime. He even tweeted during an 11 rings comparison debate that he was incredibly lucky to coach 2 of the greatest to ever play. He added that MJ and Kobe are an apples to oranges comparison. They were totally different, both extraordinary and both irreplaceable in Phil's coaching journey, and both champions because of what the Zen Master saw in them, things they couldn't always see in themselves. Then there's Pau Gasol, a name that often gets left out of this debate. That's a huge mistake. Phil Jackson spoke about Pau Gasol with a reverence that caught a lot of people off guard. When LA got him in February 2008, it seemed good, maybe even a great trade. Honestly, the whole deal was fascinating. Nobody expected Pau Gasol to walk away from $16 million. But what nobody predicted was that this elegant 7-footer from Spain would become the intellectual cornerstone of back-to-back championships. Sure, people saw this tall, lanky guy and doubted his style. It might have looked soft, but Jackson saw the truth immediately. He was incredibly excited to coach Pau because he finally had a dominant center who could anchor a system built entirely around operating out of the post, drawing defenses in, and facilitating as a primary playmaker. That intellectual approach is exactly what made Pau Gasol so different from any other big man Phil Jackson had ever coached. He was incredibly cerebral, not just a low-post threat. He read the floor like a chess grandmaster. He mastered spacing and found cutters before they even moved. He made the perfect pass under heavy pressure every single time. Those last 2 rings, in 2009 and 2010, belonged to Gasol. They were built entirely on his brilliant basketball IQ. But after a crushing defeat to the Celtics in the 2008 finals, Gasol took massive heat. Critics called him soft, saying he couldn't win when it counted. But Jackson refused to bury his star. Instead, he challenged Gasol in private, pushed him hard in practice, and saw him return in 2009 with a mean streak. Still highly skilled, but now playing with raw force behind the finesse. Jackson wrote in 11 Rings that like most title teams, the 2008-9 Lakers had spent years struggling to transition from a fractured, ego-driven squad into a unified, selfless unit. Gasol was the bridge. He connected Kobe's ferocious will to the rest of the team's execution. In the 2009 NBA Finals against Orlando, Gasol averaged 18.6 points, 9.2 boards, and nearly 2 blocks. Heavy numbers, but Phil always maintained that stats were the least of it. It was about presence, court geometry, and how deeply Gasol understood that every single cut or screen rippled across the floor, shifting options for everyone. Phil Jackson famously called Gasol a rare talent who truly mastered basketball geometry. That was far more than praise. It was the ultimate compliment Jackson could ever offer. He was saying this man saw the game the exact same way he did. And in Jackson's own universe, no honor went deeper than that. 2 rings back-to-back. That Pau Gasol and Phil Jackson partnership is one that history often overlooks, but Jackson never forgot. With 11 championship rings and a career spent coaching the absolute greatest to ever play the game, Jackson's ultimate top 5 still comes down to Jordan, Pippen, Rodman, Shaq, and Kobe, with Gasol right on the cusp, knocking at the door as the most underappreciated part of his legacy. Each one different, each one essential, each one transformed under the Zen Master's touch. Which of these 5 legends surprises you the most on Jackson's list? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. And before you head out, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Hoops Rivals so you never miss our next upload.